This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Last week I was lucky enough to be able to do some early recording for the show. This week not so much. Second week in a row where I had to go in to finish up some leftover stuff at work. Ate up pretty much the entirety of my morning. That tends to happen when you're trying to juggle about 87 different things at once and you only have 6 hours in the day to get it all done. So, well, first of all, sorry in advance if I'm a little wonky for this one. My brain still hasn't really settled down yet, so I'm trying to wield myself together here. I also had to swap chairs, so I'm very uncomfortable right now at my recording studio. And, well, just in general, I'm not in the most upbeat mood right now. But we're going to get through this one because it is Friday, so it's got to be done. And I also figured since we're kind of back to a normal podcast schedule for the next couple weeks, I don't have to exert more energy to try and watch 2 pay-per-view specials back-to-back like last weekend. Still difficult to try and find the time to watch some of the classic content, but somehow I'm finding a way to make it work. The one good thing about a lot of those shows are that they're only an hour, so I don't usually have to worry about setting aside an entire evening just to watch one episode. Plus with Retro Raw, there's barely anything to ever talk about with that show anyway. I'm more so just try to find ways to entertain myself. Kind of like watching Dynamite. Except those take me about 3 hours and 8 shots of bourbon to get through most nights. Plus, I'm already cranky and tired by the time I actually get a chance to sit down and watch those shows. So you'll be surprised to hear ahead of time. Didn't really think all that highly of the Wednesday program this week. However, with all the news that broke on that show courtesy of Booker Man, at least there is salvation coming down the pike. A light at the end of the proverbial tunnel. Took long enough to get there, but justice will be had. And we'll talk about that more at length as we dive into the show. And actually, screw it. I'm just going to get right into the report. I don't feel like doing the intros for the channel this week. Subscribe, comment, like, YouTube, Rumble, Monday, Friday. All the usual plugs that are in the description box. Read it at your leisure. So, Dynamite. Yeah, remember that pay-per-view they had on Sunday night? The one that was really bad and probably should never be spoken of again? Well, they did a thorough job sweeping that one under the rug. Which is not all that surprising. Who are we kidding? Remember last year, the Dynamite after the Forbidden Door pay-per-view where all those New Japan guys just vanished and we never saw or heard from any of them again? They all just quietly evaporated into the ether and were never acknowledged on the TV after the fact? Well, Double or Nothing is gone and done. It is indeed in the record book. And now we're back to our normally scheduled illogical programming. On to the next one. Now, I already mentioned a minute ago how this Dynamite report wasn't going to take me all that long to sift through. I was already running behind schedule trying to make time to actually watch this thing Thursday night. Really wasn't in the mood to deal with another round of all indie wrestling. I think I saw enough of that at the pay-per-view to last me a lifetime. So when I saw that the opener for this show was a 6-man tag with Flat Wheel, Yuta, Cesaro, and the Oil Mechanic, wrestling the Lucha Fucks, and another masked guy that I didn't even recognize. I said, nope, I'm good. By the way, yes, I literally just realized that I called him Cesaro. Slip of the tongue. Although now that I think of it, he probably was better off in WWE as Cesaro. Now that I'm looking at the side-by-side comparison with him in AEW, because it really ain't paying off for him, is it? At least in WWE, the guy stood out, whereas here in the land of misfit toys, Claudio's not even the third wheel in that garbage faction. Probably placed like fourth behind Flat Wheel. So that whole charade went about 15 minutes. The only positive I took away from it was, thank God none of these asshats appear to be partaking on that Collision show in a few weeks. The less I have to acknowledge these people's existence, the better off. So anyway, I only started to pick up on things with the show starting around the Jay White Juicy Fruit promo with Tony Schiavone. And, well, I could sit here and bore you with the details of their heel promo, but here's basically everything I jotted down about the initial banter with them and Tony. Tony sounds like he's been gargling with rusty razor blades. Either that or he has strep throat. Jay White is a fairly decent worker in the ring, but his promos are just about as monotone and boring as the majority of the people that ever talk on this show from week to week. And Juicy Fruit is sort of the polar opposite of Jay, where, I don't know. I don't want to insinuate that he's trying too hard, but he sounds like he's trying too hard. It's like the kind of over-the-top wacky where he's trying way too hard to be a personality when he could easily dial it back a notch or two and try to just speak without looking like he's attempting to squeeze out a 2-day turd. He just looks constipated all the time. But they called out FTR and Ricky Starks, mainly drawing attention to FTR, which was something they kind of set up in that 10-second pre-tape at the pay-per-view. And, well, they somehow managed to turn it all around by the end. Took a while to get going, especially with Jay and Juicy droning on and on here. But FTR eventually interrupt and confront the heels. Of course, they're joking that Dax and Cash came down to join the Bullet Club. Because obviously that was the plan. That's where all the rage is these days. A dorky faction whose peak hit like 10 years ago in Japan. They're still riding that gimp horse all these years later. But it's a ruse, because while Jay's cutting the promo, he goes to pass the mic to Dax, but he ends up dropping it right in front of him. And this is actually kind of clever with how they pulled this off, but while Jay's lulling FTR into a false sense of security, Juicy Fruit has his left hand in his pocket, and he's obviously concealing a gimmick or something. So when Dax lets his guard down long enough, pow! Juicy decks him right in the jaw with a roll of quarters. And that was actually kind of neat. I don't think I've seen the stack of quarters gimmick used in wrestling for a long time. And Dax sold it great. The shot looked really crisp. Good stuff with that. And while the heels are putting the boots to FTR, they lay both guys out with their finish. And right before they can keep the fight going, Ricky Starks charges the ring with a chair and sends the heels powdering over the guardrail, doing the fiery babyface promo on Jay, challenging him to a match next week so they can, quote, finish what they started, unquote. To which I then noted, oh, you mean that one-on-one match that probably should have happened at the pay-per-view instead of them getting shoehorned into a meaningless fucking battle royal that sucked 10 cocks? Yeah, I agree. That should have happened there. But of course, we're going to get the blow-off on free TV. Because that's what we do in AEW. Why make the people pay to see the feud culminate when we can just give it away on the TV show for free. Makes all the sense in the world to me. With that said, decent enough segment. And for AEW, that is a win. Speaking of wins, the moment we've all been waiting for. You take the good news where you can get it in the land of AEW, and regardless of how some fans may feel about it, this is the exact announcement that needed to happen. And yes, for about the 17th week in a row, we had Tony Khan on camera to make it official. And he's still Tony Khan. Still one of the most incredibly awkward human beings you'll ever encounter in your entire life. By all means, he probably should not be on camera because of how unsettling it is to watch him trying to act normal. But the rumors and speculations can now be officially put to bed. Because on June 17th, AEW Collision will indeed feature the return of CM Punk. And while the crowd here in San Diego was kind of split with the crowd reaction, like you could audibly hear some of the fans really try to muster up a wave of boos to try and drown out the CM Punk chants. Try as they may, it didn't really succeed at the end of the day, but this is what needed to happen, like I said. I have to tip my hat to Tony for having the gonads enough to step up as a promoter and make the right call. Regardless of how much sway the Bucks and Omega had to try and convince Tony otherwise on the decision, this is where Tony needed to put his foot down and tell them to go pound sand. You know, AEW is launching a new television program in a few weeks. Right now, the rumors have been that ticket sales for the subsequent tapings after the Chicago show haven't been particularly good. And quite frankly, that's to be expected when you're literally hanging on nothing but the company brand to sell you tickets. Like here in the States, sorry to say, but it doesn't cut the mustard anymore. I mean, I've joked before in the past about how the honeymoon phase with AEW is over. This is a pure reflection of it. Now, overseas, it's a different story. For the first few years of AEW running shows in places like the UK, like they're going to be able to sell tickets on the company name alone. But AEW's been around for far too long in this country for them to be hanging their hat on that. They need star power. They need major marquee matches. CM Punk's about the biggest name they can get right now. Whether or not that's something people want to acknowledge as the truth, it is. People will tune in to watch that pilot show to see what Punk's role will be on the Saturday show. How he contributes long-term is another matter entirely, but him as the poster boy for Collision is an absolute must. I think it was a little strange that they just kind of buried this announcement here in the middle of the program instead of maybe doing it at the top of the show or even the top of the hour. You know, try to slot it somewhere where you know you might get a slight bump in viewership. Because it's hard to even tell how this message trended to people at home if the ratings were down for this particular quarter hour. I mean, like I said, it was just kind of thrown here with little fanfare. Actually, no fanfare. They didn't even hype this up a week in advance. Which fucking figures, right? All the times Tony's hyped announcements 7 days in advance for this program, and the one time it would have actually made a difference. Of course, he doesn't do it. But whatever. This is good. This is great, actually. I don't mean to undersell it. I mean, if you go in understanding that the wrestling media is going to do everything to undercut the message and treat it like it's not a major deal, trust me, if you're a smart person watching or listening, you know how monumental this is. Punk coming back into the fold could really shift the landscape of things in AEW if, big if he's brought back in some kind of meaningful role and he contributes to the TV product in a significant manner. What that role will necessarily be, we don't know yet. For my money, I hope it's more than just main event wrestler Punk. Because while yes, that will still be instrumental for the future storylines, There are other behind-the-scenes things that Punk would be very valuable for right now. The question is whether Tony sees it the same way or not. But I hope he's more hands-on with the behind-the-scenes stuff, because we talked about before how Tony needs an agent. He needs somebody to sit down with him and go over these formats. A competent guy that understands the business and knows what he's doing. Punk's about as top shelf as you can get. And Tony has to divvy up the work now. He cannot call the shots by himself. He's got way too much stuff going on to be able to try to be a one-man working crew. Punk needs to be there. But he needs to be more than just an on-screen presence. He needs to be an off-camera presence. He needs to help him with booking, help him lay out shows, all the important things and the crucial things that go into making a television product. He could be a very valuable asset if Tony is willing to let him be. I'm going to revisit this talking point again at a later time because we need to see how this actually pans out. But keep this message in the back of your head for the time being. Yes, it's great to have Punk back into the equation again, but we need to see how it actually translates. Certainly, though, he'd be more cherished for trying to come up with better TV matches than some of the ones Tony books. And I just have to ask while it's on my mind. Did Big Bill wind up saving Tony Khan from a burning building or something in the last month? Why the fuck is this guy all over the show all of a sudden? Who did this guy blow in order to get a push like this? Think about it this way. For like the first 5 months this guy was under contract, we barely ever heard a peep out of him. He was a fucking cardboard cutout in Stokely Hathaway's faction for the longest time. Now all of a sudden, he's getting multiple TV matches and segments like every week. And for the life of me, I don't get it. He's still the same deer in the headlights guy he's always been. It's not like we've seen him improve any under the AEW banner in comparison to his run in WWE years back. He's still only the second best guy in his own tag team. This week he was part of a three-way with Trent and Swerve Strickland. I have no idea where this match came from or why it was booked. To my recollection, all three of these guys were in that battle royal at the pay-per-view, all of whom lost. Now, unlike the six-man that opened the show, I at least had this one on in the background, paying attention in spurts. The match wasn't anything I was going to remember by the time I woke up the next morning. They did a lot of video game indie moves for a while, and unsurprisingly, the finish came out of nowhere and was one of the lesser impressive moves in the entire match. In this case, Swerve goes to give Big Bill a double foot stomp off the top rope onto the ring apron. As you might expect, that gets a ginormous pop because it looks so damn impressive. And of course, the actual finish to the match is Swerve stacking up Trent in a crucifix pin. And the fans all just kind of went, huh? And that was the finish. Because as we know, nobody bothers to agent any of these matches in AEW, and everybody just kind of has free reign to do all this nonsensical shit until somebody hits a random move at the end and wins. Now, Swerve going over wasn't all that surprising, based on him being in the final two of that 21-person battle royal at the pay-per-view. I would assume Tony's probably looking to serve him up to the company mascot sooner rather than later. And of course, I'm sitting here wondering to myself, are they ever actually going to give us any kind of finality to that Keith Lee feud that they were teasing at one point and then sort of dropped and forgot about? What's the deal with that? Is that feud still a thing? Or are they just sort of waiting for Keith to grow out a full-length Gandalf beard before they ever revisit it? By that stage, I'll probably be putting together the final chapters of my Death of AEW novel, I mean, I don't care one way or the other. I'm just asking questions, you know, like a rational-minded thinker would do that watches the show from week to week. So, oh, here was a rather odd segment. The Acclaimed come out to the rampway to do a promo. They talked about losing at the pay-per-view and how disheartening it all was. They said that Billy Gunn is a legend and deserves to hold gold at least one more time. They did their everyone loves the Acclaim shtick. And that was pretty much all there was to it. It was actually so simplistic, I had to stop and rewind my DVR just to make sure I didn't miss anything. I was like, did I overlook some kind of random jump attack from the House of Drek or something? It was weird. I'm so used to seeing everybody get interrupted on this show when someone's trying to cut a promo. When I don't see it, it almost catches me off guard. Now, I don't know what it really accomplished at the end of the day. I think the Acclaim ship has kind of sailed, considering how long they've been bum-rushed around on this program. I mean, they're definitely not as white-hot as they were when they were the champs. I actually forgot those guys were the tag champs at one point. That's how badly Tony's butchered their booking in the last 6 months. I mean, they still get occasional pops for all the catchphrases and stuff, but considering where they are now compared to like a year ago when they were really starting to take off, I don't know. They're missing a spark. Maybe it's just me, but they certainly don't come off as upper mid-card or main event players like they did a while back. And that blame is mainly to be placed on Tony for allowing these guys to become total afterthoughts. I mean, they dropped the tag straps to Colton and Austin, and then they were completely forgotten about. Speak of the Devils, where the fuck are those guys at right now? Where do they drift off to? Aside from the usual AEW purgatorial state that a lot of guys fall into. And I was wondering the same thing about guys like Miro recently, where we saw him on camera for like 8 seconds after all that time off. Now here we are 3-4 weeks later, still haven't heard from the fucking guy. For all we know, he's probably still sitting in that makeshift office they made up for Tony at that building weeks back. Well, it was probably just a broom closet. Could still be sitting in there right now for all we know. Apparently he didn't get the hint that he wasn't going to be booked for future television programs. Same goes with Thunder Rosa. Part of me was wondering why the fuck they didn't just have her be the one to end Jade Cargill's pointless undefeated streak. Talk about making the girls division must-see again. They should have just had Thunder Rosa be the one to go out there and upset Jade in like a minute. Instead of Chris Statlander. I mean, no offense to Statlander or anything, but we're comparing apples to oranges when it comes to her versus Thunder Rosa as a talent. Anyway, sorry, my brain just sort of muddled into about 80 different talking points there for a minute. Told you I was a little scatterbrained this week. Got a lot on my mind. Or maybe I was just trying to avoid having to bring up anything about the next promo segment. So, well, yeah. Do y'all remember when Takeshita turned heel at the pay-per-view and fucked the Elite over in the main event? Oh, you don't? Well, of course, that would merely suggest that you could feasibly have willed yourself to sit through any of that steaming hot garbage. Well, if by happenstance you did torture yourself by watching that horse shit, allow for me to fill you in with the details. Yes, Takeshita turned heel. A heel turn that I think everybody saw coming because it wasn't even really an unpredictable swerve. It was more just a matter of when did we plan on seeing it coming. Sure enough, it happened at the opportune time. It was more apparent than a Russo swerve. So, Well, he and Don Callis came out and kind of explained why Takeshita turned, but not really. I didn't get much out of it, if I'm being honest. Something about how Callis is responsible for all of Omega's successes. He said that Takeshita is better than like all of Japan's top guys in the last 50 plus years, including Antonio Inoki, which is a crime against humanity to even mention Inoki and Takeshita in the same fucking sentence. There was a weird line in here about how Callis lost a nephew in Omega, but gained a son in Takeshita. To which I then asked, so who'd he bang to spawn that genetic mutation? And from there, I just kind of blanked out because Takeshita started cutting a promo in Japanese, and I just gave up trying to care. It was at least mercifully short. And it is oddly humorous listening to the cult AEW audience try to make Callis the most hated man in all of wrestling. It's like that Dom Mysterio type heat on WWE where you know it's sort of a gimmick and the fans are just trying to play along because it's the cool thing to do. Kind of like how booing John Cena for the last 10 years was the cool thing to do. I mean, Don Callis is kind of AEW's Dom Mysterio right now. The only people that are in on the gag are the cult elitists. I mean, everybody else couldn't give two shits. But I'll give it this. It was kind of funny hearing Callis try to scream over everybody and not lose his train of thought. Anyway, I'm going to move things along a little bit here in the report. The next match on the show was a Darby Allin Company mascot versus Gates of Agony tag match that I don't think you would have been able to get me to watch if you'd have stapled my eyes open. I did note, however, good to see this is what they had planned for Darby 4 days after he semi-mained a pay-per-view for their top world fucking title. Just sticking him in the middle of this fiasco with a company jack-off. Oh yeah, and Sting's back, by the way. And the only person in the room that even remotely cared was Tony Schiavone. Because that's literally what he gets paid to do. Be a completely useless third wheel color commentator and pop a nut whenever Sting decides to show up. Which is like once every 6 months when he decides to make a cameo. Oh, and on the topic of previous title challengers getting swept under the rug shortly thereafter, they gave poor old Jungle Jackass the same jobber treatment this week. Keep in mind, this is literally within 4 days after the guy literally just semi-mained a pay-per-view for the AEW World Championship. Here's what genius booker-in-chief Tony Khan had in mind for the next feud for Jungle Boy. He's now going to be teaming up with Hook, a failed tag team experiment that lasted all of like 3 weeks before I thought they dropped it forever, but apparently that's going to be a thing again. And their opponents? Drum roll for this one. Preston Vance. And I am not shitting you. This is exactly what I wrote down. Some random masked guy that I have never seen on this show before. I believe Sockface referenced him as Drillistico. To which I then asked, who the fuck is Drillistico? Why is he a thing? Where did he come from? I don't know. But he's on the show. That's pretty much all I got out of that segment. Just a phenomenal follow-up with Jungle Boy, Tony. Glad to see that 4 pillar story worked in your favor. Hey, I should count my blessings while I can. At least Darby and Jungle Jackoff were actually on the show in some physical capacity. Can't say the same for MJF and Sammy. MJF, I think, got like a 20-second pre-tape shoehorned into the middle of the second hour somewhere. I don't even think Sammy's name was mentioned one time the entire night. 4 pillars. Future of the company, folks. Keep that in mind for a later date. So, let's see. What do we have next on this hodgepodge of suck? Oh, yeah, I wrote this down. Apparently, Toni Storm is the new women's champion. Completely overlooked that at the pay-per-view. I mean, I didn't watch the match with her and Jamie Hayter. I knew it was short. I didn't realize they did an abrupt title switch. Completely went over my head. I guess that Jamie Hayter injury is more severe than we thought. How unfortunate. Well, in any case, the Outcasts are still garbage. And apparently Nyla Rose is still a thing. Can't even remember the last time I even mentioned that name on this channel. Much less now seeing she wrestle for the fucking TBS title. Okay. What did Nyla do to exactly earn a TBS title match with Chris Statlander? Fuck if I know. It's been so long, I totally forgot they dropped the Vicky thing. I still thought Nyla was with Vicky. Remember when she was all over this show coming out every week? Statlander retained. That's the extent of my contributions to reporting on that match. And from there, that pretty much took us to the main event for the show. The one they hyped up on the pay-per-view by having Chris Jericho and Saraya randomly challenge Adam Cole and Britt Baker to a mixed tag. And then Jericho lit a fireball in some random guy's face. So yeah, that was the thing that happened. And this is still coming fresh off that unsanctioned match with Jericho and Cole that I thought was a drizzling shits. Easily, without a doubt, one of the worst matches I've seen on pay-per-view in God knows how long. And think of the ground that covers, especially in AEW. That match was horrible beyond belief. Everything from the pointless Sabu angles to the Jericho jobbers all getting involved to Cole and Jericho having one of the worst garbage brawls in the last decade. Everything about it was just hideously bad. And of course, naturally, after Cole gets the clean, decisive babyface win at the very end, the feud must continue. So 4 days later, we get Cole and Jericho back at it again, this time with the girls kind of hanging out as the side pieces. First thing I wrote down in my notes when Cole and Baker were standing at the top of the ramp, Britt's legs are bigger than Adam Cole's. Then they took their jackets off like a minute later and I wrote down, scratch that, Britt's everything is bigger than Adam Cole. The next thing I jotted down, right from the opening bell. First thing that happens in the match. Cole and Jericho immediately go at it with fake windmill punches. Barely looked like they were even making contact. And that's when I got up to take a leak. Came back a few minutes later when Britt tagged in to square off with Saraya. And of course, about a minute after that, they pitched a commercial. Up to that point, the girls were more impressive than Jericho and Cole. There was... Well, first they came back from break with Britt getting dumped out to the floor. And here come Ruby, No-Go, and Toni Storm to start putting the wimpy-looking boots to Britt on the outside. At one point, Ruby threw like 8 rapid-fire jabs to Britt's head, none of which came even remotely close to connecting. I wrote down, I've seen blind men throw more believable-looking punches. And I facetiously noted that as a joke. But then I thought about it for a minute, and I'm like, no, actually that's true. Because I've seen George Weingroff wrestle, and he was technically legally blind. And I can tell you for sure, his punches were more convincible than anything the girls were doing here. So I killed my own joke without even trying. Anyway, well, the match is kind of trudging along for a while. The girls were particularly blown up by the end of it. Saraya at one point Irish whipped Britt into the corner buckle, and she was so tired, she couldn't even run halfway across the ring to eat a boot to the face. She sort of just walked into it and then staggered backwards. There was a stupid spot where Jericho tried to block Britt from doing a splash onto Saraya. And by that, I mean he laid on top of Saraya's dead body, but then Britt just kind of splashed him anyway. This was very poor planning. There was some other stupid shit that happened here. At one point, Britt put Jericho in the lockjaw. I guess they thought that would have been a cute spot. It was gay. Britt and Saraya got simultaneous cold tags and proceeded to run at each other and throw horribly weak-ass looking forearms. It was in the general vicinity of the other's face, if I'm being kind. Saraya ended up hitting Britt with an elevated DDT while Jericho was holding onto the baseball bat in the corner. And when Jericho went to hit Britt with the baseball bat, as if, Cole caught him with a super thigh slap kick. Him and Britt did duplicate ones to Jericho a few seconds later. And then Cole tagged in at the end so he could hit Jericho with the boom and win. This was, albeit in comparison to the pay-per-view match, this was 5 stars. In reality, it was still bad. I have no idea what the point of it was aside from they needed a TV main event. So they just kind of threw this idea together like 4 days before the actual show. I mean, Cole beating Jericho again kind of indicates to me that they're probably getting ready to set him up for MJF. It's whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, we all kind of figured that was the end game. Doesn't mean I have to like it one way or the other, but God, anything is better than Jericho at this point. I know I'm sort of grasping at straws here at the end, but look, if they're insistent on going there with Cole as a world title challenger now, more power to him. I mean, it's surely more enticing than a fucking 4 pillars match where 3 of the 4 parties involved are meaningless mid-card dorks that nobody gives a shit about anyway, outside the marks. Adam Cole does have an appeal. You know, for me, I think a lot of that program is going to boil down to the promos in order to sell me on that feud. I can sit here and talk about all the blatant issues staring me right in front of the face. Moreover, when it comes to Adam Cole's work in AEW, actually it's funny because I literally just talked about this at the Night of Champions review with Asuka, and I can sort of reiterate the same talking points here. When Cole wrestled in NXT, and he was closely working with guys like Hunter and Shawn, and they were helping to lay out his matches and work on a lot of the basics and fundamentals with him, Cole was having some of the best matches of his career down there. I have not gotten that same vibe with him in AEW. Since the day he came in, I can probably count on one hand the amount of Adam Cole matches that I've actually enjoyed. And I think the majority of them would account for him teaming up with O'Reilly and Fish for that small window. But it's like a lot of Asuka matches in WWE where I'm watching Cole wrestle here in a different environment under a completely different set of management. And it's starting to become very apparent to me that Adam Cole may have truthfully peaked with his run in NXT. He's one of those guys that probably benefited greatly from having veterans help to lay out his matches and go over how to structure things effectively so that they actually make sense. In AEW, where it's basically a fucking free-for-all and nobody puts any structure to their matches, we're kind of seeing Adam Cole unfiltered. And I hate to say it, But he does a lot of the sloppy stuff that I ream the green guys over the coals for. Fake forearms, windmill punches, really obvious thigh slaps that are so apparent on camera a fucking toddler could point them out. And above all else, he's one of the most physically unimpressive looking guys on the entire roster, so I don't ever buy anything he does offensively. The most believable thing about Adam Cole right now is the promo ability, and man, when it comes bell time, nah. I just don't see the same spark anymore. And we're knee deep in the middle of this right now. Because if the Jericho stuff is wrapped up and they're ready to move Adam Cole onto the world title, he's got a lot of work to do to convince me that he's ready for that spot. I mean, the best thing for MJF right now is to probably not point out all the obvious flaws whenever it comes to Adam Cole. Because if MJF starts bringing to light all the obvious physical issues, it's going to make it really difficult to dispute any of it. Whether or not MJF's trying to be a dick about it. And I'm kind of worried that's one of the first things he might mention. As for where that leaves Jericho in all this, fuck if I know, fuck if I care. Probably waiting to latch himself onto the next hottest prospect that shows up. So Punk, I guess. Oh dear God, I shouldn't even mention that. Because I said the same thing about Adam Cole. It would be like Jericho, wouldn't it? CM Punk back into the fold, and he's the first fucking guy to anchor the guy down. Well, until that nightmare scenario becomes a reality, we can let that one linger in the open and try not to draw too much attention to it. But there's your Double or Nothing Fallout show. It was doubly the nothing by the end. And what are we now fast approaching Forbidden Door? Which is going to be AEW's let's cram 50 New Japan guys on this show in like 3 weeks and see what the fuck happens. I'm sure it'll go over just as splendidly as last year. Meaning it'll suck, but the marks will pretend it's great because they think everything about AEW is great. And all the while, man, in the corner of my screen, I got that countdown clock waiting for June 17th to arrive. It's the real summer program we all needed. And it cannot come soon enough, folks. Let me tell you. So we are, I guess you could say, making headway toward the 87 Bash Tour. I was thinking about making a things are heating up pun joke, but as I already talked about at the beginning of the program this week, I'm not in one of those bubbly moods right now. With that said, had a little bit longer program this week. By that, I mean it was an hour instead of 90. So they split the difference. And most of the show was sort of designed to tie up some loose ends from last week. Very Horseman-heavy program again. But we also had the Midnights and Jim Cornette at the forefront more. And they were still fresh off winning the U.S. tag titles a couple weeks back. Corny is still somehow alive after having endured what I think we were led to believe were multiple cage match encounters with Ronnie Garvin at a lot of the local house shows. But again, we're not supposed to mention that because that would be breaking the fourth wall. And of course, he believes it's a conspiracy theory derived from Jim Crockett Jr. to get Corny intentionally killed inside the cage with Ronnie. So he's now filed official documentation, a court order, if you will. And, well, there was a lot of legal jargon he spouted here, but I think the gist of it was Cornette wants JCP to be personally handed over to Stan Lane, pending legal investigation. Beautiful Bobby is apparently going to be going over said documentation with a fine-tooth comb. And if it turns out that Jim Crockett is found innocent of his wrongdoings, then the promotion will be turned back over to his control. And I have no idea how this would ever pass the sniff test in a real court of law. But I guess that's why pro wrestling is great sometimes, because you can listen to material like this and all you think is, these guys are fucking morons. And the great part is, yes, that's true. They're heels. Therefore, they're supposed to be morons. But Stan has reassured us that this is not a hostile takeover. So at least they're being professional about it. Oh, and for the record, Bobby's standing there going through the manila envelope and making weird cockeyed facials at the paperwork. Superb. Probably looking at it and going, there are a lot of big words here, and they are way above my pay grade. Perhaps he was better suited to wrestle instead, which is exactly what he and Stan did. They took on Tommy Angel and Dave Isley, and, well, aside from the typical midnight squash, I noticed the studio crowd was a rowdy bunch for this particular taping. They were making weird chants at all three members of the Midnights during this match, and between Corny's nonstop bantering and all the thuds that were happening in the ring, it was really hard to make heads or tails of what the chant was. Didn't last all that long. I did, however, note one of the greatest moments I think I've ever seen on Crockett TV. And it was probably something that flew so far under the radar at the time, nobody ever thought twice about it. Cornette's there at the booth putting over his boys. And I have no idea what the fuck he was getting at with this comment. But the first time I heard it, it caught me so off guard. But what made it 10 times better is that David Crockett picked up on that comment, and he had the best comeback line. Corny says, and I quote, "As far as doing things on flat surfaces, Stan Lane is the best there is horizontally." And without missing a fucking beat, David Crockett, under his breath, while Cornette is still ranting, just goes, "You know about that, wouldn't you?" And it's so awesome. Tony never drew attention to it. Cornette never drew attention to it. I think the only people that would have caught that were David and people like me that have gross senses of humor when it comes to sexual innuendos. Easily the best moment in the history of Crockett TV. That fucking line right there. David Crockett is the man. The back and forth with those two is the best part of the show every week. No question. And aside from the commentary, which was just out of this world, Stan and Bobby beat up the job guys and won with the double goozle, which is basically a running leg sweep and lariat from opposite ends of the ring. What's their names? O'Reilly and Fish. They used to use that move in NXT years back. They just renamed it something else. In any case, we officially go from the penthouse of commentary and promo work to the outhouse of promo work. Following that great opening segment, we have Paul Jones at the booth. And for reasons that were entirely unexplained, he's now joined forces with Ivan Koloff and Vladimir Petrov. And my God, this promo. First of all, allow for me to dictate one of Jones's lines here. Not a joke. Not making this up. While he's talking about forming the alliance with the team because of a cough injury sustained by Rick Rude. Translation, he walked out of the company with one half of the tag belts and never returned to the promotion. But while Jones is putting over that fact, and he's still on a mission to gain possession of the World Tag Team titles, he infers that Pietrov will be in the area when Jones takes back the World Tag Belts. I wrote down, what the fuck does that mean? And then I wrote down, why is Jones randomly now aligned with the Russians for seemingly no reason at all? Beyond the fact that Rude and Bold left the company high and dry with the belts and basically left Jones to piss in the wind as a result. I don't know, but what I can tell you is that for all the shit I give AEW for things not making sense from week to week, and how managers will just randomly bounce around to different people off screen and there's like never any explanation for why or how it happens, do not think for a second that any of these classic shows are excluded from those conversations. They were just as guilty back in the 80s. Paul Jones is probably the textbook example of the manager that randomly just aligns with guys and we have no clue how they were ever formed. See the Paul Jones Army in 1986. But even the Rude and Bold team was kind of the same thing. Happened seemingly out of nowhere. One day the Paul Jones Army just completely vanished and all of a sudden you showed up on camera with Raging Bull and Rick Rude and we're like, what? Now we can throw the Russians into that conversation. For how little long that lasts. On the topic of Ivan, he had a quick squash with well, I'm sure the guy had a name. I just neglected to write it down. It was not one of the recurring job guys, so I didn't recognize him. Anyway, here's everything I noted. Ivan hit about 57 moves in a row and then one with the middle rope sickle. The actual match itself probably went about twice that time, but, well, then again, Ivan isn't typically known for the guy that has the most engaging squashes. Some of the fans attempted to start an egg-sucking dog chant. I believe others chanted, "It's time for the sickle," which I believe was coded language for, "Take it home, Ivan. This match is boring as fuck. You're killing us." I also caught the chant from the young kid that said, and I quote, "Beat him up, Ivan," unquote. To which I then asked, are we watching the same match? Is there anything that Ivan is doing to this guy except beating the shit out of him at the moment? These studio shows, man. There was some strange stuff that happened back in the day. And the comedy continues with this wacky 1-hour program. I'm not making this up. As God is my witness, this was the next TV match. Vladimir Pietrov versus a job guy named the Black Mountain. Okay, now pause. And I just want you to sort of envision in your mind an image of a guy named Black Mountain. Think about how you might perceive that look. Okay, so fast forward to reality. Yes, that's exactly what he was. He was a giant black man with a black mask on. He wore literally all black. And he was extraordinarily out of shape. Couldn't wrestle a lick. And did I mention he was black? It's like one of those things where you ask, all right, kid, What's your gimmick name going to be? And the name they settle on is something you'd probably hear from a 9-year-old wrestling on the trampoline with the neighbors. They just went all in with the subtleties on that one. And, well, truthfully, looking back, the Black Mountain was the least of our worries here, because then you take into account that his opponent was Vladimir Pietrov. That guy's still around, huh? I honestly don't recall him being around that long, but here we are. It's June of 1987. This guy debuted in what, January? Still on the show. He still sucks, but he's still around. They did some big lumbering big guy spots for a couple minutes, and then Pietrov won with the worst sickle in the world. This time I wasn't even entirely convinced he was even attempting the sickle. I think he just threw his arm out in the air and somehow hoped he would connect with the guy. He did, barely. But you can easily chalk this up to one of the worst squashes of the year 1987. And we're only halfway through the year. And that was shortly followed with a Barry Windham promo. And here's the gist of what I got out of that one. In fact, I'll read verbatim what I wrote down. Barry cut a promo. Says he wants Big Bubba Rogers. He also wants his belt, without explicitly naming what the name of the belt was or what promotion it belonged to. I think it was the UWF title, but do not quote me on that. For all we know, based on Barry's promo, it could have been a paper plate and tinfoil designed heavyweight title that Bubba made in art class. That was a rather abrupt deal, though. Short and sweet to the point. Which allowed for us to come back to the studio to recap a Dusty promo from NWA Pro. He's obviously hot from the attack the Horseman put on him the previous week. Talked about the fact that Tully may have tried to take him out at the knees, but he's still standing right here to call him out. And he's going over the timeline and the whole contract stipulation regarding their TV title match. I think he also called out the New Breed and told him if we're going to try to be cheap imitations, they should at least try to make it halfway decent. And there was some other stuff in here about funky monkeys and living on the edge of a lightning bolt. The classic Dustyisms. And while it wasn't out of the ordinary of most Dusty promos we ever hear, Magnum TA had some follow-up at the studio. If I'm not mistaken, this has got to be one of the first Magnum promos at the studio probably since before the car accident, right? I mean, we've seen him in pre-tapes, but live at the studio, I don't think we've seen him on the show since late 86. He was incognito here, too. Sporting the shades and the ball cap. Trying to conceal his identity for whatever reason. And, well, admittedly so. It was not Magnum's best promo. He was sort of rambling at the end there and trying to tie things together a little bit. It's been a while since he had the chance to do it, so he's a bit rusty. Talked about how he'll be in Greensboro with $100,000 at ringside. Talked about how Tully will be in for the fight of his life. And no matter what he tries to do, he'll never rid Dusty of the wrestling business. He has too much heart and too much passion for the sport to allow the Horseman to end his career with cheap shots. And, well, this is kind of cool. Nikita Koloff had a quick squash with Art Pritz, but right before he went to the ring, he actually went over and shook Magnum's hand. And obviously, if you know the history with him and Magnum from their series of matches last summer, you would know their checkered past, especially with how it ultimately led to Nikita's face turn. So that was kind of cool to bring that all full circle. And he ended up beating Pritz in about a minute with the Russian sickle. Then he was back at the booth with Tony to call out Lex Luger. Specifically, he wanted to direct our attention to some footage that was shot on the Sunday taping, because Luger made a bold statement directed toward Nikita, challenging him to come out and face him like a man, And it didn't take all that long for Nikita to answer. Both men almost immediately came to blows. One may call it a hockey fight. And they brawled around ringside while some officials ran down and tried to get in between them. I think some of the locker room baby faces emptied out as well. I wrote down, nice to see a worked fight in professional wrestling where nobody's throwing fake windmill punches. It's almost a little too refreshing to see these days. But, well, as you would expect, Nikita's very miffed about the situation, so he's telling Lex Luger that the next time they meet, he's going to eat his lunch. And if I were in Luger's shoes, I'd believe it. And then following all that, we had a new breed squash with two job guys. I believe with the last names Hardy. And no, it was not Matt and Jeff. If it was, I'd have maybe suggested they went over instead of Sean Royal and Chris Champion. The only thing I wrote down about this were the random pair of like 3 or 4 girls in the front row that were, for whatever reason, super behind the new breed. Probably the only 4 fans that the new breed ever had. And the best part, Royal and Champion, I think, were so caught off guard by this, they started playing it up. And they began working as babyfaces. This is coming from the same person who'd be sitting here telling you, I can't tell whether or not the new breed are supposed to be face or heel from week to week. I'm still not really sure. In any case, they did some moves. They strutted around for a minute or two. During this, they were also calling out Jimmy Valiant and Lasertron. I wrote down, why is that feud still a thing? There was also a very noticeable botch here with Champion trying to do a double axe handle from the top out to the floor. It was very apparent that he lost his footing and almost died. But there was also a very weird camera cut. I'm not suggesting they may have edited out the botch, but it was very peculiar. It's like, one moment I'm seeing the guy sort of lose his balance on the top rope, and then when they pan the camera to a shot on the floor, he's like halfway down already. So I don't know if he just fell down and they retaped it or what happened, but it was very odd. Made even better by the fact that like 3 seconds later, Champion just sort of threw one of the job guys into the podium. I wrote down, sucks to be that jabroni. And after nearly being put into a coma, I was so bored watching this, Royal gave Champion some kind of springboard launch off the apron into the ring so they could pin the guy with a splash. Sucked. Tell you what didn't suck, though, was his Ric Flair promo. And I think it's safe to say, you know you're in for something special when Rick is decked out from head to toe in a bright silver suit. Up to and including the alligator shoes. Cannot say I've ever seen somebody sport bright silver dress shoes and make it look stylish, but the Nature Boy pulled it off. And aside from the usual Horseman verbiage here, he drew attention to the Dusty promo from earlier. Talked about how anytime Dusty decides to pick a fight with any singular man in the Horsemen, he's also picking a fight with just about everybody. And for Dusty, he's made a career out of fighting from underneath and overcoming the odds. But he may have rode that lightning bolt all the way to the finish line for the very last time. And as for Magnum, as great as he was when he was champion, he's still walking thin ice right now when he tries to stick his nose in Horseman business. So when it comes to Greensboro, he better stay clear of the path and not try to pick a fight that he knows he can't win. And, he fired up on Nikita a little bit and told him that Luger will soon become the U.S. Heavyweight Champion. And right before they wrap things up here, he made it abundantly clear that he still wants to fuck the shit out of Precious. Because, of course, we still got to beat that story over everybody's head. Still can't get over the hilarity of him referring to her, quote, bodacious tatas. Unquote. Seriously, it's so bad. But I love it. So here's everything I wrote down about the next match. Ricky and Robert squash. Bell sounded. They cut to commercial almost immediately. Came back just in time to see them win with a double dropkick. My follow-up was, why even bother? I guess so they could remind us that Ricky and Robert are still a thing on this program. Because even their follow-up promo was mostly a nothing burger. Literally just name-dropped virtually every heel team on the entire roster and told everybody that they're here to prove they're the best team. At which point I said, yeah, maybe reuniting that Midnight's program was the best thing for Ricky and Robert's careers. Because everything I've seen them do in 1987 up to this point, utterly worthless. So while we wait for that feud to get reintroduced into the equation, Arn Anderson had a quick squash with Randy Barber. Probably more accurate to say it was a dissection. Arn just cranked on the guy's arm for several minutes, twisted it up into a pretzel multiple times over. All to tribute Cousin Ole, doing exactly what he was taught. Work a body part. And after he worked said body part for a few minutes, he hit a double-A spine buster off the ropes, and then quickly followed it up with a gourd buster, wherein he dropped poor Barber right on the side of his face and hip. Ouch. And now, staying on the topic of the Horsemen for a minute here, Tully was out of the booth with Dark Journey, a.k.a. the personal secretary, that I believe lasted all of about 2 months before she was gone and never seen again. But, well, first, Tully gave a slow clap for Magnum TA, telling him he's looking forward to the day where he slips on a pair of wrestling trunks and gets back in the ring again. But until that day comes, he can just keep carrying that stack of cash down to ringside and keep it nice and warm for the Horsemen. And I was going to make a snide joke about the slipping on a pair of trunks line, but probably not in good taste. Then Tully mocked Dusty for the fact that Tully still has 2 functioning legs. And out of all the matches and fights they've had in the last 2 years, June 6, 1987 is where it will all come to a head. The most important match in their series of matches, where all the others pale in comparison to the implications and stakes of this one. It's for all the money and for all the gold. And this is where the story will end. No questions asked. Comes to a head when Tully walks out with $100,000 and puts a cap on Dusty's career for good. And meanwhile, Dark Journey is still a thing. So, I forgot about this until I just read my notes here. Well, remember that rock and roll squash a minute ago that I really didn't write much down about because it was so insignificant? Here's what I wrote down about this Jimmy Garvin squash with Trent Knight. What I believe amounted to the first and only match of Trent Knight's career. Damn, son. This is brutal. Here's everything that happened in this match. Garvin gave Knight a back suplex and dumped him right on the back of his head. Thought he was dead upon impact. And I think Garvin just called an audible and took it home right then after with a brainbuster. Realizing that he nearly crippled this man. If this Trent Knight fella ever wrestled a day in his life afterwards, I would be shocked. But apparently he had heat with Garvin because he got killed. That only went about a minute, though. If that. Then we came back from break for a J.J. Luger promo. Luger looking like he was ready for a retirement day at the golf course. And after J.J. said some stuff that I really didn't jot a whole lot down about, Luger did another one of his I'm trying way too hard to be mad promos, calling out Nikita and talking about how he wants the U.S. heavyweight title. And you might be wondering to yourself, what does a forced, fake, mad Lex Luger promo sound like? Well, it's something to the extent of Luger saying that he's sick of Nikita's bullshit. Says that he wants to be U.S. Heavyweight Champion. Says that he's tired of him and ducking and dodging. He's coming for the title. And you can't stop him. No matter how hard he tries. He's coming. And he won't stop. Only thing that was missing was him capping the promo with, "I'm pissed now. And these t-shirts are too tight, Billy." For anybody that doesn't get that reference, just YouTube it. So up next, the Road Warriors came out and killed Mike Forrest and Rick Sullivan in about 5 seconds. And when I say kill, not exaggerating, killed them worse than Jimmy Garvin killed that other job guy. I think that some of the boys had a beef to settle with some of these job guys this week because these poor fuckers were getting massacred. 5 seconds into the opening bell, Animal takes Mike Forrest and literally heaves him out to the floor through the ropes. And as soon as his body made contact with the concrete, David Crockett goes, "Oh, he killed that guy." Very jolly fashion, as per usual, but I thought the exact same thing. I wrote down, that guy's dead. Probably never walked a day in his life again. And then Hawk and Animal killed the other dude with a doomsday about a minute later and won. And staying on the subject of the Legion of Doom, they did a very fiery promo, basically doing everything but calling the Horsemen pussies. I believe one of Hawk's lines directed toward Flair was saying, "Cheap suits and alligator shoes don't do, quote, diddly do in the ring." At which point I officially declared this the moment where I forever gave up taking Hawk's promos seriously. That one line right there, that was the breaking point. Any person that tries to use the word diddly do, no respect. Sorry to say, but Hawk is in the doghouse with me for that one. Beyond that, though, Road Warriors want to beat people up. That was the extent of their promo, which I know is groundbreaking news in 1987 for Crockett Promotions. The Road Warriors hate people. Never would have been able to figure that one out. And from there, with approximately 2 minutes left in the show, Ron Garvin went out there and beat up a guy named Barry Phelps. Beat him with a knockout punch in like a minute. And then Tony and David did some very brisk show closing plugs, trying to promote tomorrow's Sunday show as well as some of the upcoming spot shows. I actually noted. You think they were pressed for time a little bit at the end there? They said, "Ronnie, you have 8 seconds. Go out there, punch the guy out, and GTFO." And that's exactly what he did. It's kind of an odd way to round out everything, but I'll give it this. They try to pack in as much content as possible. I would say a little bit of a step down from the last couple shows, and knocking off that extra half hour sometimes makes all the difference in the world. You're trying to give things ample amount of screen time, but there's only so much you're going to be able to fit in from week to week. With all the layered stories, sometimes even 90 minutes doesn't seem like they have enough time to spotlight everything. But with what they had to work with here, show wasn't horrible. Still no plugs for the Bash Tour yet. But, June is fast approaching here, so I'm sure we'll start seeing some VTRs and advertisements in the works. But that's kind of all there was to say about Crockett for this week. And then turning things over to World Class here and looking at the card for this week, really wasn't a whole lot going on here either. Occasionally there will be those episodes where about 45 minutes of nothing go by and I'm sitting here struggling trying to come up with anything to talk about. This is kind of one of those shows this week. The opener was Killer Khan, and what I believe was his singles debut for the territory. Now, obviously, he debuted at the Texas Stadium show when he aligned with the Freebirds. He was accompanied by Terry Gordy out there as he took on Tony Torres. Just a standard big man squash. You know, the idea was that Gordy had been instructing Khan to use the Oriental Spike as the finish, so that was what the match was mainly built around here. And Khan just kind of beat the shit out of Tony until he hit him with a middle rope knee drop and immediately followed it with a spike to the throat. And I think it was a ref stoppage. Definitely a decisive win for Killer Khan, though. And then following that, we went to a Chris Adams interview with Bill Mercer where they recapped sort of an iconic moment here in World Class. We've seen the interactions with Sunshine and Precious on TV, and all that sort of came to a head at the Texas Stadium show in that mixed tag. Here, we were introduced to a new wrinkle in that whole saga. The official introduction to Stella Mae French. Now, you may hear that name and not really put much thought into it. Let me assure you one thing. If you've ever seen that promo, and for those that know what I'm talking about, it's a fucking classic. Yes, she is technically another one of those drop-in-the-bucket type personalities that didn't really last all that long in the business, but for the little time she was around in the territories, she certainly made heads roll in more ways than one. I don't know if they ever wind up showing that legendary promo on TV, but God, I'm hoping they do at some point. Elsewise, I might need to bring it up on audio here so we can all endure it together. But because she was new to the scene here, they kind of gave us the introductory to her gimmick, the kayfabe aunt of Sunshine. More importantly, the old school button-down stern auntie of Sunshine, which is why the gimmick was so great. And in her debut during the pre-tape, she got very physical with not just Jimmy Garvin, but she also started shoving officials around, literally doing everything in her power to wrap her hands around Garvin's throat. She is fed up with all the crap he's put Sunshine through, and God damn it, she is out for revenge. And she wasn't going to hold back. And this is only the beginning. With what this is leading to for the summer of '84, another classic series of Dallas moments coming. Even though it was short-lived, it was still awesome. Stella Mae French. Do not forget that name, because you're going to see her as a recurring personality on television. I think she was around Mid-South for a cup of coffee as well, so you may have seen her pop up a time or two over there in '84. But boy, am I looking forward to all that. So at that point, we cut to another Chief Jewel Strongbow squash. He wrestled John King this week. Kind of like last time, I talked about how I really didn't have much of a memory of the Strongbows as a tag team in wrestling. A little before my time, and I don't really recall hearing a lot of experts talk about their run in the WWF in the early 80s. Of course, you put Joel Strongbow out here in a singles capacity in 1984 in Dallas, and I'm totally out to lunch trying to recall anything he ever did in the territory of major note. The match was kind of rotten. I mean, obviously another showcase piece for Strongbow. Last time I saw him wrestle, he really didn't seem to do a whole lot offensively, and this wasn't much different. He chopped the shit out of King for a while. King tried to cut him off, but Strongbow fired up, and he hit King with a back body drop off the ropes, and then quickly followed that with an Indian deathlock and got the verbal submission. It was mildly more impressive than the Killer Khan squash, which is basically on par with comparing cow shit with mule shit. They're both shit. Just a matter of which one smells worse. Personal preference, I guess. Tell you one thing, though. a rarity for Dallas TV, but the promos were kind of the one that saved this from being an all-time clunker in the annals of our world-class reviews, because the show really didn't have much going on, but the promo material made it worthwhile. The Stella Mae French pre-tape put a smile on my face because it brought back some good memories. For this particular segment, we had Gino Hernandez doing a promo, and he was also a guy that showed back up at the David Memorial event, what mainly consisted of a 30-second cameo where I believe he did a heat promo on Chris Adams and Jimmy Garvin, and that was kind of all there was to it. Here, he was there to once again remind us of his mission in world class now that he's back. He is now also the American Heavyweight Champion after apparently having won it off camera in another one of those phantom title switches. And I will be the first to tell you, I have no fucking clue who last held the American title on this show before dropping it to Gino. I think Mercer insinuated that it was Jimmy Garvin, which I guess would make sense if you consider the timeline. But then again, I mean, him and Adams were flip-flopping the belt so much off camera, I mean, can't even keep track of it. It is the problem with a lot of these territory matches back in the day where guys hot potatoed a lot of the regional titles so often, like, you can never tell who was the champion at a given time because belts changed hands so frequently. I mean, if I wanted to, I could go out of my way to make a spreadsheet to try and keep track of all of it, but what's the point? I still know that Kerry's the NWA World Heavyweight Champion by this point, but again, in terms of all the regional champions, yeah, no clue. I think the Von Erichs are still the six-man champions because they just beat the Freebirds at the stadium show. The American Tag Champs, no idea. Same goes with whoever was the Texas Heavyweight Champ at the time. But I'll try to make a cognitive note that Gino is currently the American Heavyweight Champ. Speak of the Devil, he was out there to wrestle a match this week. I think what was also his return match to television, again after a couple years absence from the territory, a warm, friendly return, as Bill Mercer noted. And I wrestled Johnny Mantell. And of course, as soon as I saw Gino was wrestling Johnny here, I said, oh, this one's getting some time, clearly. It was probably also going to be extremely competitive, considering who the Booker man was at the time. And I wasn't entirely wrong with that assertion. Ken Mantell making sure his brother gets that spotlight. It was a good TV match, don't get me wrong. One of the first Gino Hernandez matches I recall seeing in a long time. Now, obviously, he was a mainstay of the world class, so he was incredibly over as a heel with the audience. They played up the story early with Mantell frustrating Gino and causing him to continually play defense. You know, lots of rolling out to the floor and trying to slow the pace down. You know, eventually Gino would get in some cheap shots so he could take control. Lots of "Go, Johnny, go" chants during the heat portion. And eventually Mantell got a good hope spot with catching Gino going up top. Gave him the classic Flair press slam off the top rope. That was followed shortly thereafter with Gino taking a phenomenal upside-down flip bump into the corner buckle out to the floor. Literally looked like a guy getting shot out of a cannon. And with the pace quickening a little bit toward the finish, Mantell kept fighting back, ended up trying to monkey flip off the ropes, but Gino grabbed the ropes to counter it, and after giving Johnny a suplex out of the corner, he ended up catching him with a middle rope elbow drop for the 3 count. And the last few minutes were pretty good. Crowd was really into it by the end. And Gino, he worked his ass off here. That's kind of what made him a great worker back in the day. The fact that he was such a tremendous in-ring talent. Probably another example, too, where a guy does his damnedest to make a standard squash about 10 times better than it has any right to be. It's definitely not a bad thing. Makes him a more valuable workhorse. And Well, from there, that pretty much took us to the TV main event. A never-before-seen encounter between Michael Hayes and Kevin Von Erich. Yeah, that's a joke I haven't already beaten to death on this channel. Tell you what, man. If you thought WWE repeated television matches way often, you should go back and watch some Dallas TV back in the day with Freebirds and Von Erichs from like 83 to 85. Talk about beating a dead horse. At this stage, I think they've gone beyond that. They pretty much dug out that dead horse, scraped off the dirt. Also, they could kick the dead horse and then bury it again. That is how often they've gone back to the well with these matches. I mean, the chemistry's always there, but... God. I mean, how many times can you repeat the same talking points with these guys fighting? Flurry of offense from Kevin. Hayes gets a momentary point of heat. Kevin spends the majority of the match trying to catch Hayes off guard so he can put him in the claw. Probably one of the best parts in the entire match was the deal where Kevin got Hayes in a body scissors. He's got his knees wrapped around Hayes' ribs. Every time Hayes would try to fire up and drive an elbow down into Kevin, he would squeeze his legs a little harder, making it more difficult for the guy to breathe. And then Hayes would do the over-dramatic selling where he's flailing his arms in the air and going, ah! I thought it was amusing. Somewhere in here, Bill Mercer mentions something about a tournament that is now being held for the Texas Heavyweight title. I don't know if that was a tournament that was currently ongoing, but again, one of those deals where they passingly mention something in the middle of the show that pertains to a story that has nothing to do with the match. Thought it was funny. And at the end, Kevin got the claw locked in on Hayes. And while Hayes was fading, Gordy ended up running in for the attempted save, but he winds up getting the claw slapped on him as well. And all of that leads to, and I quote, the Killer Khan running in for the DQ finish. He actually ends up locking in the Oriental Spike on Kevin momentarily. And, well, before the heels can ensue any further damage, while the attempted 3-on-1 beatdown continues, here comes the babyface locker room to make the save. Kevin is now bleeding from the mouth and asking what the hell just happened. He's very disoriented. And, well, they were definitely milking that post-match angle for a minute or two, trying to gain a lot of sympathy on Kevin for it. You know, obviously the lame DQ finish is always going to strike a nerve with the wrong people, especially the ones that hate fucked finishes. But the main story coming out of it was the continuation of Killer Khan's run with the territory, sort of an added wrinkle to the Freebirds Von Erich dynamic. And, yeah, it does give him opportunities to freshen up the feud in some ways, but it's kind of all there was to take away from it. Oh, and Stella Mae French. She's arrived. And there's more to come. So hell yeah. Got more classic moments to look forward to. But that kind of rounded out some of the territory talk for today. Not really much going on, but that's all right. Shorter review than normal. No dilemmas. So this weekend, well, I'll have the Retro Raw report. And we'll also get back to the SmackDown show. Obviously, we did not review last week because of the two pay-per-view events happening that weekend, so I ran out of time. But I will be back doing the SmackDown report as well, so I'll try to find a way to squeeze that in this weekend. Anyhow, thanks everybody for watching, and come check us out on the Monday show when we're back for more content. Take care. Peace out.